Emma Walsh watched her elderly neighbor collapse on his front porch, clutching his chest as his face turned blue. She dialed 911 while running toward him, her nursing training kicking in automatically. What she didn't expect was the surge of excitement that coursed through her veins as she watched him struggle for breath. The paramedics arrived within minutes, praising Emma for her quick thinking and professional response. Harold Brennan survived his heart attack thanks to her intervention, and the local newspaper featured a heartwarming story about the heroic nurse who saved her neighbor's life. Emma smiled modestly in the accompanying photograph, accepting accolades with practiced humility. But alone in her apartment that night, Emma replayed those crucial moments with disturbing clarity. She remembered the exact second when she could have administered CPR differently, how easily she could have delayed her 911 call by precious minutes, how simple it would have been to let Harold die while maintaining her reputation as a caring neighbor. Emma had been a pediatric nurse for 12 years, drawn to the profession by genuine compassion for sick children. Or so she'd believed. Lately, she'd begun questioning her motivations as she noticed how intensely she studied her young patients during their most vulnerable moments. The way their eyes widened with fear during procedures, how their small bodies trembled under her touch, the complete trust they placed in her capable hands. She'd never hurt a child, never acted on the dark thoughts that increasingly occupied her mind. But Emma found herself volunteering for the most critical cases, the ones where life and death balanced on a knife's edge. She told herself it was because she was skilled and reliable. Deep down, she knew it was because she craved the power that came with holding someone else's life in her hands. Harold's heart attack had awakened something dormant in Emma's psychology. She'd experienced a rush more intense than any drug, a euphoric high that came from watching someone teeter between survival and death. The fact that she'd chosen to save him only intensified the thrill, proving to herself that she possessed ultimate control over life and death. Emma began researching Harold's medical history, accessing his files through the hospital database with her credentials. He had severe coronary artery disease, diabetes, and lived alone with no family nearby. His next heart attack would likely be fatal, especially if emergency response was delayed or if he received inadequate care. She started visiting Harold regularly under the guise of checking on his recovery. Emma brought him meals, organized his medications, and positioned herself as his primary caregiver. Harold was grateful for her attention, treating her like the daughter he'd never had. His trust in her was absolute and touching. During these visits, Emma studied Harold's daily routines and medical needs with clinical precision. She noted which medications he took and when, observed his stress triggers, and documented his physical limitations. She told herself she was being thorough in her caregiving, but part of her mind was calculating how easily his care could be sabotaged. Emma discovered that Harold took blood thinners twice daily for his heart condition. A simple adjustment to his dosage could cause internal bleeding or stroke. She had access to medication samples at the hospital, and replacing his pills would be effortless. No one would question his death given his serious cardiac history. The power of this knowledge was intoxicating. Emma found herself fantasizing about Harold's potential death during her shifts at work, imagining how she would react with appropriate grief and shock. She pictured herself comforting other neighbors, accepting their praise for how well she'd cared for him in his final weeks. But Emma's fascination extended beyond Harold to other vulnerable people in her orbit. She began noticing elderly patients at the hospital who had no visitors, terminally ill children whose families were emotionally exhausted, isolated individuals who desperately needed human connection. Each represented an opportunity to experience that addictive rush of control over life and death. Emma started working extra shifts in the intensive care unit, volunteering for the most hopeless cases. She told her supervisor she wanted to provide comfort to dying patients, that she felt called to ease their final moments. In reality, she was studying the dying process with scientific fascination, learning how death approached and how it could be hastened or delayed. She'd never crossed the line from observation to action, but Emma could feel herself approaching that threshold. The temptation grew stronger each day as she realized how easy it would be to become an angel of death, someone who decided when suffering should end and when recovery was possible. Harold's next appointment with his cardiologist was scheduled for Friday. Emma had already volunteered to drive him, positioning herself as his advocate and support system. She'd researched his doctor's typical recommendations and knew that medication adjustments were likely. Emma sat in her apartment Wednesday evening, holding a bottle of Harold's blood thinners in her palm. She'd replaced them with identical pills containing triple the dosage, a change that could cause fatal hemorrhaging within days. Harold trusted her completely and would never question the medication she provided. All she had to do was wait. Harold would take his modified pills as scheduled, and his body would begin bleeding internally. By the time symptoms appeared, it would be too late for medical intervention. Emma would rush him to the hospital, provide emotional support to the medical team, and grieve appropriately for her beloved elderly friend. The plan was perfect, untraceable, and completely consistent with her reputation as a caring neighbor and dedicated nurse. Emma had constructed the ideal murder disguised as natural death, and no one would ever suspect the heroic woman who tried so hard to save Harold's life. She set the bottle on her nightstand and closed her eyes, already anticipating the rush of power she would experience watching Harold die by her design while everyone praised her compassionate efforts to save him. Sophia Chun adjusted the fresh flowers in her daughter's hospital room, arranging them with the same meticulous care she applied to every aspect of 8-year-old Lily's medical treatment. The other parents in the pediatric ward admired Sophia's unwavering dedication, her detailed medical journals, and her fierce advocacy for her chronically ill child. What they didn't know was that Lily's mysterious illness was entirely manufactured by her loving mother. Sophia had been poisoning her daughter with small doses of household chemicals for 6 months, creating symptoms that baffled even the most experienced pediatric specialists. The constant medical attention, the sympathy from friends and strangers, the sense of purpose that came from caring for a sick child had become more addictive than any drug. It had started innocently enough. Lily had developed a stomach bug during flu season and Sophia had genuinely worried about her daughter's health. But the attention she received as a concerned mother, the way medical professionals hung on her every word about symptoms and timeline, the flood of support from her community had awakened something powerful in Sophia's psychology. When Lily recovered, Sophia found herself missing the intensity of those crisis moments. Her life felt empty without the drama of medical emergencies, the constant validation of being an exceptional mother facing extraordinary challenges. So she'd begun adding small amounts of cleaning products to Lily's juice boxes, creating intermittent nausea and abdominal pain that brought them back to the hospital. The doctors were puzzled by Lily's recurring symptoms. Blood tests revealed elevated liver enzymes, suggesting toxin exposure, but environmental screenings of their home found nothing dangerous. Sophia helpfully provided detailed logs of everything Lily ate, drank, and touched, carefully omitting her own contributions to her daughter's declining health. As Lily's condition worsened, Sophia's reputation as a devoted mother grew. She started a blog documenting their journey, gaining thousands of followers who admired her strength and resilience. Fundraising campaigns raised money for experimental treatments and medical expenses. Local news stations featured their story, portraying Sophia as an inspiration to other parents facing childhood illness. The attention was intoxicating. Sophia found herself escalating Lily's poisoning to maintain the level of medical crisis that generated maximum sympathy and support. She researched symptoms carefully, selecting toxins that would create dramatic but non-fatal effects. Each hospital admission brought renewed attention and reinforced her identity as a heroic mother battling against impossible odds. Dr. Martinez, Lily's primary physician, had begun asking more probing questions about the timing of symptoms and potential exposure sources. Sophia deflected his inquiries with emotional breakdowns and desperate pleas for answers, playing the role of frantic mother to perfection. But she sensed that his suspicions were growing, and she needed to be more careful. Sophia had learned to vary her methods and timing, making Lily's illness appear unpredictable and organic. Sometimes she used cleaning products, other times expired medication she'd saved from previous prescriptions. The key was creating symptoms that seemed connected to Lily's supposed underlying condition while avoiding any pattern that might reveal deliberate poisoning. The psychological rewards of her deception had become essential to Sophia's sense of self. She craved the concerned phone calls from relatives, the meals delivered by neighbors, the special treatment from medical staff who viewed her as an exceptional mother. Without Lily's illness, Sophia was just another suburban parent living an unremarkable life. But maintaining the deception required constant vigilance and escalation. Lily was becoming sicker, her small body struggling to process the regular doses of toxins her mother administered. Sophia found herself walking a dangerous line between creating dramatic symptoms and causing permanent damage to her daughter's developing organs. The online support community Sophia had cultivated was particularly invested in Lily's story. Hundreds of followers tracked every update, donated money for treatments, and shared their story across social media platforms. Sophia felt pressure to provide increasingly dramatic updates to maintain their engagement and support. Last week, she'd given Lily a larger dose of bleach-contaminated juice, resulting in severe vomiting and dehydration that required emergency intervention. The incident had generated enormous sympathy and media attention, but it had also brought Lily dangerously close to organ failure. Sophia realized she was approaching the limits of what her daughter's body could survive. Dr. Martinez had scheduled additional tests for Friday, including specialized toxin screenings that might reveal the true cause of Lily's symptoms. Sophia knew she needed to either stop the poisoning completely or find a way to deflect suspicion permanently. Stopping meant losing the attention and identity that had become central to her existence. Continuing meant risking discovery and Lily's death. Sophia sat beside Lily's hospital bed, watching her pale daughter sleep fitfully. The child had lost 15 pounds over 6 months, her once bright eyes now dull with chronic illness. Lily trusted her mother completely, taking every medication and following every instruction without question. The magnitude of what she'd done to her own child should have filled Sophia with horror and remorse. Instead, she felt primarily concerned about maintaining her deception and the lifestyle it provided. The realization that she valued attention more than her daughter's well-being was disturbing, but not enough to stop her from planning the next phase of Lily's manufactured illness. Sophia had researched Munchausen syndrome by proxy during her online activities, learning about other mothers who'd harmed their children for attention and sympathy. She understood intellectually that her behavior fit the diagnostic criteria perfectly, but she couldn't reconcile the clinical definition with her own experience of being a devoted mother fighting for her child's life. Tomorrow she would meet with Dr. Martinez to discuss the upcoming test results. Sophia had already prepared her emotional responses, practiced her questions about potential treatments, and researched new symptoms she could introduce if suspicion was deflected. She'd become expert at manipulating both medical professionals and her online audience, crafting a narrative that painted her as a victim rather than a perpetrator. As Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring about stomach pain, Sophia reached for the juice box she'd prepared earlier. One more dose would ensure dramatic symptoms during tomorrow's consultation, reinforcing the mystery illness narrative and generating renewed sympathy from Dr. Martinez. She held the contaminated juice while watching her daughter's peaceful face, calculating the precise amount needed to create the desired effect without causing permanent damage. Victoria Reynolds smiled warmly as she handed her colleague Jessica the homemade coffee she'd brought from the break room. Jessica was working late again on the quarterly report, stressed about the approaching deadline and grateful for Victoria's thoughtful gesture. She had no idea that her helpful coworker had laced the coffee with a mild sedative that would cause drowsiness and confusion within the hour. Victoria had been systematically sabotaging Jessica's work performance for 3 months, positioning herself as the supportive colleague while orchestrating her rival's professional downfall. The promotion they were both competing for would be decided next week, and Victoria intended to ensure that Jessica's recent mistakes and declining productivity would eliminate her from consideration. It had started when Victoria overheard their supervisor praising Jessica's innovative project management approach. The comment had triggered a familiar rage in Victoria. The same burning resentment she'd felt throughout her career when others received recognition she believed she deserved. Jessica was younger, less experienced, and annoyingly cheerful about everything. The idea that she might be promoted over Victoria was unacceptable. Victoria had begun her campaign with subtle interference. She'd delete important emails from Jessica's inbox, reschedule her meetings without notification, and provide incorrect information about client requirements. Each small sabotage created stress and confusion in Jessica's work life while Victoria maintained her facade of helpful concern. When Jessica started making uncharacteristic errors and missing deadlines, Victoria was always there to offer assistance and emotional support. She listened sympathetically to Jessica's concerns about her declining performance, suggested stress management techniques, and volunteered to help with urgent projects. Her colleagues viewed Victoria as an exceptionally supportive team member, someone who went above and beyond to help struggling coworkers. But support wasn't Victoria's true motivation. She was studying Jessica's reactions to stress, learning which interventions would cause maximum psychological impact while maintaining her own innocent appearance. Victoria had discovered that she possessed an intuitive understanding of workplace psychology, able to manipulate professional relationships with surgical precision. The sedatives were Victoria's latest escalation. She'd stolen them from her mother's medication supply, calculating the dosage needed to cause noticeable impairment without triggering medical concern. Jessica would appear tired and unfocused during important meetings, making poor decisions that would reinforce the perception that she was cracking under pressure. Victoria watched Jessica sip the contaminated coffee while reviewing financial projections. Within 30 minutes, Jessica's eyelids would grow heavy, her concentration would waver, and she'd make calculation errors that Victoria could helpfully point out later. The pattern of offering assistance after creating problems was becoming Victoria's signature approach. Jessica had confided in Victoria about her personal struggles recently. Her mother was battling cancer. Her relationship was strained by work stress, and she was questioning whether she was cut out for the demanding corporate environment. Victoria had listened with apparent empathy, offering encouragement and practical advice while secretly cataloging every vulnerability she could exploit. During their conversation, Victoria had learned that Jessica took antidepressants for anxiety, information she'd filed away for potential future use. She'd also discovered that Jessica's confidence was fragile beneath her professional exterior, dependent on positive feedback and validation from supervisors. This knowledge became ammunition for Victoria's psychological campaign. Victoria had begun undermining Jessica's relationships with key colleagues, spreading subtle concerns about her reliability and decision-making abilities. She'd mentioned Jessica's recent mistakes in casual conversations, express worry about her apparent stress levels, and suggest that perhaps the promotion pressure was affecting her judgment. Each comment was delivered with apparent concern, making Victoria appear caring rather than malicious. The promotion decision was scheduled for next Wednesday, and Victoria needed to ensure that Jessica's final presentation would be a disaster. She'd already corrupted the backup files on Jessica's computer, introducing subtle errors in the financial projections that would be embarrassing to discover during the meeting. Jessica would appear unprepared and unprofessional, while Victoria's own presentation would shine by comparison. Victoria had also scheduled a fake client emergency for Tuesday evening, knowing that Jessica would volunteer to handle it despite her exhaustion. The manufactured crisis would keep Jessica working until dawn, ensuring she'd be sleep-deprived and unfocused during the crucial presentation. Victoria would express concern about Jessica's overcommitment while secretly enjoying the chaos she'd created. The psychological manipulation had become more satisfying than the promotion itself. Victoria found herself energized by the complexity of her deceptions, the challenge of maintaining multiple false narratives simultaneously. She'd discovered a talent for reading people's psychological weaknesses and exploiting them with devastating effectiveness. Jessica finished her coffee and yawned, rubbing her eyes as the sedative began taking effect. Victoria suggested that Jessica should go home early, that she looked exhausted and needed rest. Jessica declined, determined to finish the report despite her increasing drowsiness. Victoria excused herself to use the restroom, suppressing a smile as she watched Jessica struggle to focus on her work. By tomorrow morning, Jessica would have made numerous errors in the financial calculations, errors that Victoria would discover during her helpful review of the document. The mistakes would be subtle enough to avoid immediate detection, but significant enough to cause serious problems if presented to senior management. The pattern was perfect. Victoria created problems, offered solutions, and positioned herself as Jessica's most reliable support system. When Jessica inevitably failed, Victoria would be viewed as the colleague who'd tried hardest to help her succeed. The promotion would be Victoria's reward for her exceptional team spirit and professional competence. Victoria returned to her desk and began working on her own presentation, occasionally glancing over to watch Jessica's increasing confusion and fatigue. She'd timed everything perfectly. Jessica would stay late trying to complete work that was sabotaged beyond repair, while Victoria went home to prepare for her triumphant presentation to senior management. As Victoria packed up her belongings for the evening, she reflected on how easily workplace relationships could be manipulated by someone who understood human psychology. Jessica's trust in her helpful colleague was absolute, making her vulnerable to an enemy she couldn't identify or defend against. Victoria said goodnight to Jessica, offering one final expression of concern about her apparent exhaustion. Jessica smiled gratefully, thanking Victoria for being such a supportive colleague during this stressful period. The irony was delicious, and Victoria savored it as she walked toward the elevator, already planning tomorrow's helpful interventions in Jessica's continued professional destruction. Amanda Foster adjusted the microphone at the community center podium, addressing the packed room of concerned parents about the recent string of accidents affecting local children. Her voice carried the perfect blend of authority and compassion as she outlined new safety initiatives, positioning herself as the neighborhood's protector while secretly planning the next incident she would orchestrate. Amanda had been manufacturing these accidents for 8 months, creating a climate of fear that elevated her status as an indispensable community leader. Each carefully staged incident brought increased attention to her safety advocacy, more funding for her programs, and deeper trust from parents who viewed her as their children's guardian angel. The pattern was elegant in its simplicity. Amanda would identify potential hazards around the neighborhood, then engineer situations where children would be injured in seemingly random accidents. A loose railing she'd secretly loosened, playground equipment she'd subtly damaged, or crosswalk signals she'd tampered with during her evening walks. Each incident appeared to be the result of municipal neglect rather than deliberate sabotage. After each accident, Amanda would be among the first responders, providing comfort to injured children and support to their frightened parents. She'd document safety violations, organize community meetings, and demand accountability from city officials. Her passionate advocacy made her a local celebrity, featured in newspapers and invited to speak at regional conferences about child safety. The most recent incident had involved 7-year-old Marcus Thompson, who'd fallen through rotted deckboards at the neighborhood playground. Amanda had carefully weakened the wood over several weeks, creating a hazard that would eventually cause injury while appearing to be normal wear and tear. When Marcus fell and broke his arm, Amanda had been conveniently nearby to call for help and comfort his mother. The accident had generated exactly the response Amanda anticipated. Parents demanded immediate playground inspections. The city allocated emergency funding for safety improvements, and Amanda was appointed to lead a new task force on child protection. Her influence in the community reached new heights while Marcus recovered from injuries she deliberately caused. Amanda understood that her behavior met the clinical definition of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, but she rationalized it as necessary sacrifice for the greater good. These minor injuries prevented more serious accidents by highlighting dangerous conditions and forcing corrective action. She was saving lives by creating controlled incidents that exposed systemic safety failures. The psychological rewards of her deception had become essential to Amanda's identity. She craved the moment when parents looked to her for leadership during crisis. The authority she wielded over community resources, the media attention that portrayed her as a heroic advocate. Without these manufactured emergencies, Amanda felt invisible and powerless. But maintaining her facade required constant escalation. The community was becoming accustomed to minor accidents, and Amanda needed more dramatic incidents to sustain the level of attention and influence she'd grown dependent upon. She'd been researching more serious sabotage techniques, studying structural engineering and child psychology to optimize the impact of her interventions. Amanda's next target was the community pool, which would reopen next week for summer season. She'd already identified several ways to create dangerous conditions that would result in near-drowning incidents, situations that would generate massive media attention and position her as the person who'd predicted and prevented a tragedy. The plan involved tampering with the pool's filtration system to create bacterial contamination that would make children sick, then discovering the problem during a routine safety inspection she'd volunteered to conduct. Parents would praise her vigilance while she privately enjoyed the chaos she'd created. The city would be forced to implement her proposed oversight protocols, further cementing her authority over community safety. Amanda had also begun targeting individual families whose children presented optimal opportunities for staged accidents. The Peterson family had recently moved to the neighborhood, And their 5-year-old daughter Emma was exactly the type of trusting, adventurous child who would make an ideal victim. Amanda had been befriending the parents, offering to babysit and positioning herself as a reliable neighbor. During her time with Emma, Amanda had been studying the child's habits and vulnerabilities, identifying ways to create accidents that would appear spontaneous while being completely under Amanda's control. A medication reaction she could trigger with allergens, a fall she could orchestrate through environmental manipulation, or playground equipment she could sabotage moments before Emma used it. The psychological thrill of planning these incidents had become more satisfying than the actual execution. Amanda found herself energized by the complexity of her deceptions, the challenge of creating perfect accidents that would never be traced back to deliberate sabotage. She developed an expertise in child safety that made her manipulations virtually undetectable. Tonight's community meeting was Amanda's opportunity to propose expanded safety protocols that would give her access to every playground, school, and recreational facility in the area. Parents would enthusiastically support her proposals, unaware that they were authorizing their children's potential victimizer to monitor and control the spaces where their families spent time. Amanda concluded her presentation to thunderous applause, accepting thanks and praise from parents who viewed her as their community's salvation. She scheduled follow-up meetings, assigned volunteer responsibilities, and coordinated with city officials about implementing her safety recommendations. Everything was proceeding exactly as she'd planned. As the meeting ended, Amanda lingered to speak with individual parents about specific concerns. She listened to their fears about playground safety, traffic dangers, and potential predators, gathering intelligence about their priorities and vulnerabilities. Each conversation provided insight into how she could create incidents that would maximize emotional impact while reinforcing her role as protector. Mrs. Peterson approached Amanda with questions about summer safety programs for Emma. Amanda smiled warmly, expressing her commitment to keeping all neighborhood children safe while mentally cataloging opportunities to engineer Emma's first accident. The irony of being thanked for protection by the mother of her intended victim was exquisite. Amanda packed up her presentation materials, already planning the pool contamination she would implement over the weekend. By Monday morning, several children would be hospitalized with mysterious illnesses, and Amanda would be there to demand answers, propose solutions, and accept credit for preventing an even worse outbreak. She drove home through neighborhoods where parents now locked their doors and watched their children more carefully, never realizing that the greatest threat to their families was the woman they trusted most to keep them safe. Don't miss our next psychological thriller exploring how evil manipulates trust. Subscribe now for more chilling stories that expose the predators hiding in plain sight. Share this series with someone who needs to understand these warning signs, and comment below. Have you ever encountered someone who seemed too helpful, too perfect, too eager to be your savior? Your stories help others recognize these dangerous patterns. Hit that notification bell and join our community of viewers who aren't afraid to look evil directly in the eye.